Hi.
Hello all. We're in the chapter, The Misuse of Disfellowshipping. Right, friends? In Search of Christian Freedom, page 353, Percy Harding. Since all disfellowshipping actions are reported to the headquarters organization, it is not unaware of what is happening. The pathetic case of Percy Harding illustrates this, for it took place virtually on the international headquarters doorstep. In 1910, when about 20 years old, Percy, a native of Western Canada, began reading the writings of Pastor Russell, and in 6 months had read some 3,000 pages of material. He resigned from the Protestant church of which he was a member and found himself totally alone in his new belief among his townspeople. He began witnessing and formed 2 groups in the area and held baptisms at a nearby river. He writes, quote, "In 1918, I quit a good job to become a colporteur." That's the old word for pioneer. My territory covered hundreds of square miles, mostly along the railways from southern Alberta to the Pacific coast. I also covered the country territory on foot, carrying 2 small bags of books. Often I walked as much as 15 to 25 miles a day.
After 7 years of this activity, on May 25, 1925, he went to Brooklyn, New York, to serve at the Watchtower headquarters. After about 4 years, the attitude developing under the presidency of Rutherford and the conduct of some exercising oversight left Percy disillusioned. In 1929, he terminated his work at the headquarters. Despite this, he remained associated and active with the same congregation in Brooklyn for the following 56 years. Of what then happened, he writes, quote, "From May 1925 until December 1981, I remained in the same congregation until I was disfellowshipped for talking about God's Word to a few of my friends. This was unbelievable, and so far as the society is concerned, a disgraceful performance. The Judicial Committee had a letter from another board of elders in a different congregation. They had disfellowshipped a friend of mine. They questioned him at length about other people he had talked to about the Bible. He caved in and told them, mentioning my name among others. So this letter from the elders, including things I and the others had said, was presented to me with a request that I comment on it. I told the committee that I had nothing to say, and what went on between me and my friends was strictly a private matter and was nobody else's business. They promised me a copy of the letter, but I never received it."
And Percy continues, "Then they started asking questions, the most important being, do you believe that society is God's organization and that it is bringing forth truth? So I said, there's nothing in God's Word to indicate that God ever used an organization to bring forth truth. From Moses down through all the prophets to John and the Revelation, it was always an individual. There were 3 committee meetings, the last being at Bethel. The night I was disfellowshipped, Harry Poloyan, a longtime member of the Watchtower's writing staff, made a speech at the Kingdom Hall, bringing a charge that was not even discussed in any of the committee meetings, that of disrupting the unity of the congregation. He misused 2 John 10 and 11 in instructing 175 people to cut me cold. After the meeting, everyone filed out, passing me by like I was a leper." That's the end of Percy's quote.
Percy was 91 years old and in poor health. Whether one may consider his understanding of certain scriptures as correct or mistaken, the fact remains that the issue arose not because he was creating a disturbance, one that was congregationally evident, but because of private conversations with friends. No one in the congregation had complained of his being an agitator, and the matter became an issue only as a result of a letter from another congregation that initiated investigation and interrogation by elders into his private remarks on scriptural subjects among personal friends. On a trip to the Northeast in 1982, I visited Percy Harding at his home on 6th Street in Brooklyn. He sat seemingly dwarfed by the large chair, a small, frail-looking man, obviously weakened by age and illness.
I asked myself how anyone in his right mind could view a person like that, having no position or particular influence, as constituting such a danger that despite his some 70 years of association, it was deemed necessary that he be disfellowshipped and cut off from all his lifetime associates. I thought that an organization must be extremely unsure of itself, feel an incredible sense of vulnerability, to ever consider such a frail, aged man as a threat. Concerning the effect that disfellowshipping had on his personal circumstances, he writes, quote, "Before this, there were 2 witness nurses who visited me almost every week. They did some things for me that I was unable to do for myself, and more importantly, they were on call if I needed them. Since I will be 92 years old on August 18th, who knows when an emergency may arrive. After I was disfellowshipped, I called one of the nurses. Her husband answered the phone and said, 'Anne is not allowed to talk to you.' Let me say again that the only thing the elders have against me is that I talk to a few of my friends about the Bible." That's the end of Percy's quote.
In my conversations with Percy, this is Ray, I found him to be a blunt-speaking man. He may well have been quite blunt in his discussions with the elders who judged him. But even if he had been more than blunt, had been caustic, even cantankerous, how could that possibly justify cutting off a 91-year-old man, single, ill, with no relatives within hundreds of miles, writing him off along with his over 70 years of active association, as someone now to be ignored and forgotten? What heinous crime had he committed that would justify this? I find it difficult to understand how anyone claiming to be a disciple of the true shepherd of the sheep, Jesus Christ, could be party to such an action, one that in my mind merits no less description than heartless. Yet, as stated, it took place on the very doorstep of the world headquarters of the Watchtower Society. Percy is now dead, having died in his sleep on February 3rd, 1984. During the 25 months following his disfellowshipment, not a single person from the congregation with which he had been associated for 56 years came to see him or inquire of his needs. That's terrible.
We're going to put a link to videos we've made on fear religion. If you study the religions of the Orient, the religions that were in the nations round about Israel in ancient times, you soon find out they were different than the religion of Israel in this very characteristic. They were dominated by fear, specifically fear of contamination, not by love, and certainly not even by what we would call faith. They were religions that were superstitions, really, by modern definition. So we'll put those links on your screen. And next time, Ray talks about the ultimate sin. The subhead is the ultimate sin, disagreeing with the organization.